Well, hey, welcome back for another update on my classes for this fall semester. It's crazy how far we're in. This is like week 7 out of 16 weeks, so we're getting really close. Next week will be like our halfway point for the semester. It's crazy. It's already at that area. So midterms are coming up next week that I've got to work on. So that'll be really interesting to do. So let's start off with my mediation class today. So, in mediation, one thing that we have been spending a ton of time doing lately is understanding how to ask good questions. So, when you do a mediation, the mediator wants to take time, at least when it comes to transformative mediation, to take time to ask questions, to understand each person. So, you'll meet with each person individually that is in conflict. So, like if it's a business dispute that's going on, you'll meet with each of the parties in this dispute individually and talk with them and understand, not just what happened and why did it happen. We want to understand, who are you? What are you like? And what does this mean to you to be in this conflict? And how has it affected your life and ideas? What is important to you in life? So we build relationships, we build connections with each of the parties. We try to understand not just what was their perspective. So in transactional mediation, usually they just come in and go, okay, what is your side of the story? What happened? Okay, what do you want to get out of this? Okay, great. Let me go talk to the other person. What do you want? Okay, here's what they want. Are you willing to do this? It's more of a transaction that happens basically. So most mediation, that's what it is that you're doing. In transformative mediation, though, we want to understand the person, the humanity of each side. What is their perspective? What's going on with each side? What are their values? And those kinds of things. To just understand them better. And then as we get them into a room together to discuss what's going on, they can start hearing each other's responses. So when you meet individually with them, it gives you a chance to build those relationships of rapport with them, help them to understand that you're not there to necessarily side with them, but you're there to provide an opportunity of like a safe space so that they can work with the other person on this conflict. And so as you ask them questions, you start to understand more about them and what's going on. How did they feel hurt by the other person? What would they like instead? How has that affected their life? What are their goals and outcomes they want from this? How can we help you to feel okay coming into a room with them and dealing with the situation? And then ask them questions. So part of that is going to be learning how to understand the person's perspective. So there's 3 major challenges to understanding the truth of what happened. And they all deal with perceptual limitations. I think last week I talked about this in the video. So things like generalizations happen. Oftentimes we don't, when we have a memory of something, we don't remember it perfectly. Most people, because of our perceptual filters, do not perfectly remember something. Now, some people will have like a photographic memory. Some people, like sometimes autistic people, the ones that are severely autistic, they often will remember something exactly the way it was because their perceptual filters aren't as thorough as the rest of ours. For the average person, your perceptual filters are going to distort what the memory is of what happened. So, and this is why sometimes when you get together with siblings and you talk about an event, you all remember it a little differently. And you'll be like, I remember when this happened. And everybody else is like, I don't remember that. I don't remember that being a part of it. And so maybe you've actually conflated 2 memories together. So it's interesting when you get other people's perspectives. They'll be like, oh, I don't remember that part of it happening. And they're like, oh, yeah, this happened. Huh. Oh, that's interesting. I don't remember that. So sometimes we delete information out of our memory. Sometimes we distort information, like something that wasn't a big part of it suddenly becomes a major part of the memory, or vice versa. It was a big part of it, and we minimize it down. So we distort our memories. We distort the information that our brain is storing. or we generalize it. We just kind of make something that was really specific and just kind of blanket it out there and generalize it out. So these are things that happen constantly, like all the time we do this. So this is why you'll remember something different than your spouse or your children. Now, oftentimes a parent will catch more details than the kids will because their perceptual filters are not quite as distinctive as parents. Parents, if you go to like, oh yeah, we went to Walmart and I remember I bought this cool toy and it was awesome and it was wonderful and it was such a fun experience, but the parents are like, that wasn't such a fun experience because you spent like 30 minutes looking at one shelf of stuff and I tried to get you to buy stuff and you just wouldn't buy it and we had to look at different things and you just took forever to make your decision and stuff. Whereas in the kids' memory, they just remember I went to the store and I got a cool toy and then I got to go home. But the parents remembering how long it took for them to pick that darn toy out, how many toys they looked at before they picked the one that they wanted, and then maybe there was like a car accident outside, or something major happened outside or something, or other major things happened that day. That's, again, those are difference in perceptual filters. So as a mediator, our job is to understand where their perceptual filters might be skewing information and ask deeper questions. Ask more about those things to understand it. Because obviously, when you're in conflict, it's really kind of a default standpoint to not blame yourself. If you get involved in a car accident, it is so easy to, your brain almost instantly starts to try to find a way to skew the facts so that you're not guilty. I think last week we talked about this with little kids, like one kid will push another kid and the one that fell down makes it sound like it was like the Incredible Hulk knocked him to the ground. Whereas the kid that did the pushing is like, I just barely touched him like this. It wasn't, they're going to shift and change that information. So our job is to dig deep into that to understand what's really there. So there's two major reasons we do this. One is we want to look for what is the truth of this situation. What is really going on here with this? Was there someone at fault for something? And help the people understand that they are part of the conflict problem. Oftentimes when we get into conflict, we say, they are a problem, I'm not a problem. But we have to realize that how we react to them, even if it is them that did something negative, if we respond in a negative way, we are part of the cycle of conflict. We're encouraging more conflict. We have to be willing to acknowledge that we made a comment that made it worse. That's part of admitting I'm a part of this pattern of conflict. And once I acknowledge that, now I can do something about that. So we help the people to acknowledge their part in the pattern of conflict. And when both parties can do that, man, it makes a big impact on their ability to start to look for a solution to resolve this issue. The second thing we want to focus on is the humanity of the other person. Yes, we're in conflict, but I need to admit you are just as equal of a person as me. We need to be seen as in the same boat. If we're opposite boats, it's easy to hate them and see bad things happen to them because it won't affect me. But if we're in the same boat, anything that happens to them is going to affect me. So when I can realize that there is an influence between us, there is a connection, and they're just as human as I am, meaning they're just as important as I want to be. They also have challenges and issues and make bad mistakes like I do sometimes. When I can see them as equal with me, that's when healing starts. Because then we start to go, okay, I understand that, I need to accept my role in what happened, and I need to apologize for that and adjust for that. And if they're willing to do the same thing, okay, great. We can move forward. So that's what mediation is all about, especially transformative mediation. So we just spent a lot of time learning questions, getting into doing role plays and things like that to just learn how to ask those questions, to talk with people so that they can understand the humanity of each other and what role they played in the process of conflict. So a lot of fun, a lot of good stuff leading up to next week is our midterm, which is an hour long pre-mediation. So I've got to work with somebody. They're going to be playing a role in a conflict with somebody, and so I'm going to sit down with this one person for an hour and interview them to understand them and what can we do to help them to just to understand what's going on, and then they'll interview me for an hour, basically. So that's our midterm. That's what we're going to do next week. So I'll report next week on how that turned out and how that worked out. Um, for Islam, let's talk about Islam. This one's been really a fun week to get into. So we're not quite into a lot of history as far as like going through the historical. Okay, this happened and this happened and this happened, like we've done in the past. So this week we've been focusing more on understanding the theology of Islam and how does that come together. So in Islam, there's two there, there's two ways to think about the rules and guidelines of Islam. There is the revealed way, and I'm trying to remember what was the words. What did we use for those words? Wahi is divine revelation. So these are, when it comes down to Islamic law, okay, there's two ways to think about this. There's divine revelation, which Islam does believe in divine revelation. It's one of the few religions that does. That's one way that it actually makes it quite similar to Mormonism, is they believe in divine revelation. The difference is that for Sunni Islam, which is a majority of Islam in the world today, they believe that the Prophet Muhammad gave us divine revelation, and he's the only one. There's nobody else that's going to give divine revelation. So divine revelation is a reality, but it only came from Muhammad, and there is no more. So in that sense, Islam is very similar to Protestantism and evangelicalism, in that idea of there is no more revelation. You read the book of the ancient prophets, and that's all you need, basically. So that's where their modern Christianity and Islam match up quite well. The other type is called akul, and it is human reason. So here's what's interesting. Islam is a very legally structured religion. Which is so interesting to look at, because it makes you think different about Christianity and your own religion. To see it that way, because Islam started with Muhammad. He got revelations from God through the angel Gabriel, and eventually these revelations got written down. There's an oral tradition at first, and then was later written down, and that is the Quran. So that is the book of revelations from Muhammad, is the Quran, the main book of scripture for Islam. Then there's another book of scripture called the Hadith. The Hadith is writings of stories about how the Prophet Muhammad applied the principles of the revelations in his life. So, because he was the prophet, he's seen as a extra special type of a person. God chose him and not somebody else for a reason. And because he's this extra special person that God picked to reveal his word to, then his life, how he lived his life, how he exemplified the teachings, is a great source of learning and understanding. And so the Hadith is a compilation of stories about the life of Muhammad and how he taught and discussed and applied Islamic principles during his lifetime. So the Quran is the revealed word. The Hadith is revealing the principles of Islam through the life and actions and behaviors of the Prophet Muhammad. Those come together to form the main scriptures for Islam. And so this is in Islam, we get the idea of what's called Sharia law. If you're familiar with the Desert Storm wars and Iraq wars that we went through in the 90s and 2000s, then you've probably heard that term Sharia law quite often. So Sharia law is the law of Islam, basically. And so it is, Sharia law comes from understanding the Quran and the Hadith. So part of that's the revealed word, the Wahi, and part of that is understanding how to properly interpret what is in the revealed word And how can that apply to our day and age today? That is the akul. That is the human reason. And there's two major thoughts on human reason. So one is, does the Quran actually say something about a topic? Yes, if it does, then we can refer to the Quran about that topic and think about, what does that mean? What is a proper interpretation of it? And how does that help us understand what we need to be doing today? So that's proper reasoning. So there's scholars, and there's like 4 or 5 different schools of thought when it comes to Islamic thinking. And it's so interesting because, again, Islam has come out to be a religion that is really steeped in education. To be a good Islamist, you need to study. You need to understand Arabic. You need to understand the history of Islam. You need to understand how this works. And so they've built a lot of legal structure into Islam to help it function and reason and think through things. So there's a lot of like underlying legal principles and ideas of how Islam works. It's a very structured religion. It's really fascinating. Which is different because Christianity doesn't necessarily have a good legal infrastructure to it. There are some organizational principles, but like for evangelicalism, there's just not much there. Mormonism has some, Catholicism has a lot of organizational principles, but evangelicalism is just kind of feel the Spirit, hang out, do whatever kind of things. And so it doesn't have a lot of a legal structure of thinking through things like Islam does. So Islam, it's interesting because it came from people who were mostly illiterate, these Arabic tribes, but as they grew, they said, we need to learn, we need to understand. And so they started studying all the other cultures around them, and that's how they learned and grew and were able to do quite a bit and become an Islamic nation. I think we talked about that last week, the conquering they did, becoming a nation. Now they had to run a government. They didn't know how to run a government, and so they studied and learned from other people how they ran government, and they used them. So Islam is a very heavy education-centered religion. It's really fascinating that way. So legal ideas and concepts are important. They have a name for everything, every concept and idea, and so it's really interesting how it's very legally organized. Like if a lawyer was to start a religion, Islam would be it would be structured a lot like Islam is, basically. So to interpret the law, how do we interpret the laws? How do we interpret the Quran? To do that properly, you have to have people who are Islamic scholars. These are people who they've spent their whole lives training. They've got big degrees. They're just spent tons and tons of time learning the history, learning to understand Islamic law and Islamic history, Middle Eastern history and things. And so they study and they learn and they understand. And so they're the ones that come together for the consensus of, here's how this applies. Here's how we make this work. So like in the LDS Church, there's the 12 apostles in the first presidency, and they're the ones that set the policy of, here's how we interpret the scripture. It's kind of a similar idea to that, which is really fascinating. Most religions have some kind of a board of elders or others like that are the ones that set the policy of, here's how we're going to deal with these issues. Here's how we believe about these principles and ideas. And so Islam has the same thing. And they look at these challenges to the law and they think through them and say, here's our ruling on this. So it's just really fascinating to look at. But you can make some logical reasoning yourself in some ways to go, here I am, I need to deal with this issue. I can make some common sense understandings of what needs to happen as well. So that is a little bit about how the legal structure works within Islam. So you have Sharia law that's like the whole encompassing of the rules and guidelines and ideas. Then there's the interpretations of it. So certain nations have different interpretations of the law. So certain places are more strict on laws and ideas in Islam, and certain nations are not. Islam is kind of turned into a nation state type concept, and so each region, like how you live Islamic law in Israel, or not Israel, in Saudi Arabia, is different than Indonesia. It's the same Islam, but like a different flavor of Islam type idea. So, an analogous way to look at this is Christianity is all the religions and philosophies that follow Jesus Christ, and like New Testament ideas and concepts. But there's lots of different interpretations of that. So you do Baptist, you do Methodist, do you do Mormonism, do you do Pentecostal, do you do all these other things? And so there's different flavors of Christianity that, but they all claim to follow Christ and go that way. Islam's the same. Again, Islam is a religious philosophy that has variations in it. Even the idea of progressives versus fundamentalists are an issue. And we talked about that a little bit last week as well, how there's a fundamentalist group that took over the present day Iran area that was influencing the Silk Road and taking the wealth and values there. And then they moved down into India. When they pushed down into India and started to run into Hindus, they believed that the Hindu faith was completely wrong and bad and against Islam, and so there was arguments and fights. And when the Islamists took over, they suppressed Hinduism and caused a lot of consternation. And so they approached religion as, we have to get rid of the bad religions and push everybody out. Whereas when Islam moved into Indonesia, it was a little more, it wasn't quite as strict. And they learned from the people in Indonesia about their religions, and then a mystic version of Islam started to emerge from ideas from Islam and from these other religions on the islands. And so the islanders were like, hey, you can, even when Islam took over some of the islands in Indonesia, as far as like the governments were Islamists, they didn't persecute people who believed different than them. They allowed for plurality of religion. As long as you paid your taxes and you did good things, we didn't necessarily care as a government. So that was very different. So they have these different ideas. There's extremists and very fundamentalists, and then there's progressives in Islam as well that are wanting to improve it and update the interpretations and things of it. So similar struggles that all of Christianity and other groups have, Islam has as well. So a lot of fun to look at how do we interpret, how do we think about these ideas differently. Oh, one thing that's interesting is Sharia, or not Sharia, Shiism. So there's Sunni Muslim, which is more than 80% of the world is Sunni Muslim. Then there's Shia Muslim. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, that Shiism, Shia Muslims come off the idea that the cousin of not yeah Ali, was Ali the cousin? Now I just got confused on the relationship. Ali was, I believe, a cousin to the Prophet Muhammad, and there is supposedly uh, information that says that Muhammad wanted Ali to be his successor, and but he wasn't. The caliphates were taken over with the Umayyads and the others, and so that's where that split happened. The Shias believe still in revelation, but they believe that there's several religious leaders that has that ability to have revelation. So they believe in a little bit more of a continuing revelation. The problem is the religious leader. There's so many religious leaders that will have that ability to do it. The religious leader that has that ability to have revelation has left. They're in this alternate world where they're waiting until the second coming, and then they'll be back to continue to establish Shiism and Muslim and Islam and things, and then as the end of the world is nearing. And so they're waiting for this apocalyptic return of this prophet who will then have more revelation. So that was just kind of an interesting idea, because they don't believe that revelation stopped with Muhammad like the Sunnis do. They believe that there's more continuation, but the guy that's supposed to do it has been here, but then he left, and so we're waiting for him to return for the end of the world, basically. So some fascinating ideas. Islam's a really cool religion to study and to learn a lot of interesting concepts. Some people will interpret it to be a violent religion, because there are some fundamentalist groups that we see a lot on the news. But there's actually a tremendous amount of, in the teachings of the Quran, peace and nonviolence. And so it's the minority fundamentalist groups that the news focuses on tends to get the most attention. And so we miss the fact that Islam is a very peaceful and actually pretty good. It's very closely connected with Christianity when you really start to understand its tenets and things. So it's been fun to get to know the Quran and the Hadith and how the theology has come together and things in Islam. So it was really fun. All right, so an update on my research paper. Last week I was able to submit my first 8 pages of it. Haven't heard yet how I did on those. Hopefully I got a good score on those. But the point is, so the beginning of a research paper, you're doing what's known as a historiography. You're basically kind of saying, here's what everybody else thinks. Here's the conversation that's been happening around this, and here's how I'm going to contribute to it. And so I talked about that last week, just how interesting it is that how law and religion kind of intersect. Sometimes they come together and work well together, and then sometimes they diverge. And so even in Christianity, we see this happen several times, especially in English history, because the history of England, in a way, is the history of Christianity. There's a lot of influence, a lot of connections with that. So it was really fun to get in and study those points and ideas. So now that I have that done, I'm still doing some more research in that area, looking for tips and ideas and things. Like I got a book on the Magna Carta this week that I've been looking at to understand how did religion, Magna Carta is seen as one of the most important laws to establish the concept of how do we deal with kingdoms and how do we deal with commerce and different things. It's a big important document to help establish a lot of rules that encouraged the improvements of societies. And so religion was a part of it. And so how did the Magna Carta as a law in pre-England times actually encourage religion and influence religion? So I looked into that a little bit and some other stories and ideas. Talk about the idea of Thomas Becket, who was a gentleman. He was born in middle class, which means he didn't have a lot of chances for success, but he's a really smart guy. He grew up through the ranks in the kingdom of Henry II, if I remember right, became a really good friend of Henry II and actually the chancellor to the kingdom, which puts him in a very high position. He's like second only to the king himself. The chancellor can do a lot in a kingdom. He became chancellor, and then there was a vacancy in the religious component in England, the See of Canterbury, and so that's kind of the whoever's the See of Canterbury is kind of the Pope, if you will, and so they needed that position. The previous person had died, and no one had been filled in that spot. So Henry II saw an opportunity to go, oh, I'm going to put my buddy Thomas Becket in, appoint him as the religious leader, and then that will allow me to have a religious influence on the people to control not just the government, but also control religion a little bit to get my policies and my agendas and ideas done. So he thought this would be a great idea. I can now use religion as a tool to help me with governing and maintaining my grasp of power and those things. And so we put Thomas Becket over there. Thomas Becket promptly resigned as chancellor and focused himself completely on the work of the church. And as he did this, he realized the challenges. And so he actually pushed back against the king in some ways to push the king's authority back and say, hey, king, you're taking too much authority in these spots. You can't do that. And so that where we thought maybe they would come together, it actually divided them further apart. And so we see these challenges through time. It's been really interesting to see that. So now I get to start researching more fun topics like what were laws in England that influenced Latter-day Saint worship. So that's more of where I'm diving into specifics. I'm going to have a ton more to talk about next week as I get in and talk about those as well. So we'll see you then.